Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome, and joining me today to share the stories behind the 10 books that influenced her the most on her life journey is spiritual teacher and author Bridget Finklaire. A former Harley Street psychotherapist and hypnotherapist, and a self-confessed growth junkie and wilderness lover, Bridget Finklaire, there's a mouthful there. Bridget Finklaire was born in Hampshire and lived in London for almost 30 years before moving to Cape Town, South Africa in 2012. An expert in space clearing, creating sacred space, and a ghost buster, and I'm going to ask her more about that one later. Bridget has studied and taught many spiritual disciplines and courses in intuition, creating meditation, healing, and Feng Shui. And she currently facilitates a study group for the Book of Knowledge, The Keys of Enoch, by Dr. J.J. Hurtak. Bridget Finklaire, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sandie. It's lovely to be here.
And now you say that you naively thought that you'd be able to choose 10 spiritual books and write about them in an afternoon, but yes, you were wrong. So tell us about that challenge.
Well, I thought I'd go for this challenge. This sounds really interesting, and I've always been into spiritual books, and often, had to get rid of far too many when I moved from England. I thought this is going to be easy. The ones that stand out, I'll just write them down. Oh my goodness, I had to grapple because you realize that there's so many good spiritual books that have influenced your path, and it's so difficult to choose which ones. And then there's ones that you've forgotten about, and I think it can only ever be a snapshot in time, because immediately I'd actually finally written it. The next day I was thinking, what about so-and-so book? Oh, and I didn't include this, and I didn't include that, and maybe I should have changed this. And so it's a snapshot in time for the day that I wrote it, I think, but it took a lot longer than I thought it would.
Well, I'm glad you persevered with it. And what was interesting about your list is that you mulled over certain titles that many people would expect to find on your list, and you chose something else entirely, something not so well known. So I think that's very interesting, and it's quite refreshing to come across that. So we'll talk about those a little bit later. But tell us, what do books mean to you? I mean, you said you had to get rid of loads before you moved to South Africa. How hard was that?
Very hard, very, very hard. I had bookcases lined with books, and sometimes you think, oh, I'll never go back to that one, I'll get rid of it. And then a minute you do, you find you want to look some reference up. So they've been traveling with me, not as a child, actually. My parents were not great book lovers, so it was quite difficult for me as a child to get my hands on books. So it was only really when I left home that I started collecting books and reading much more widely. And of course, when I started the spiritual journey, it really kicked in, and also lots of therapy books as well. But having to get rid of them, it was one of those forced things. I was moving to South Africa. I had a suitcase when I first moved here. I rented out my flat in London, so I left sort of nice furniture and things for the new occupants. And I could only really keep a very small amount of personal things in my niece's loft. And books are heavy and they take up a lot of space. So that was really the rationale behind it. But all kinds of books that I let go of, cookery books, things like that, this favourite recipe, and you think, oh, that's in that book that I let go of. And I wish I hadn't. And in the meantime, I kept clothes, because there was expensive clothes. I always thought, I can replace the books, but expensive clothes, I thought, I'll never replace those. And then I end up living in Cape Town. It's a seaside town with a completely different climate. And then half the clothes that I wore to Harley Street, I'm never going to wear them, and I'm never going to fit into them again now anyway. So,
And you could have had your books instead.
Could have had my books instead. And I often think that's one of my regrets.
Yeah. Well, you moved in 2012 and Kindle was definitely available then. Did you, swap them for Kindle versions?
I did. A lot of them I did get on Kindle versions. But what I find with spiritual books is I'm a great note taker. I'm afraid I don't look after my spiritual books because I've got this pink pen, pale pink pen, that I underline things and scribble things in the margin, or pencil, and dog ear things. I'm terrible. And the spines look dreadful at the end. It's because somehow by writing something in the margin or underlining something, it solidifies it for me. And if I ever want to flick through that book again, I can kind of quickly flick through the bits that for me were important. And I know you can do that on a Kindle, but it's not the same. There's something else about a Kindle that I'll tell you that I find really frustrating. When you have an actual paperback, it's there on your table or by your bedside cabinet, in your handbag, wherever it is, where every time you pick it up, you see the cover, the name of the author, and the name of the book. When you have a Kindle, it's just your Kindle in its leather case. You open it and you're already halfway through the book or wherever you left it. So you keep forgetting who's the author, what's this book called?
Yeah. And often some of them don't even show the cover of the book as well.
Or they're so small you can't read it.
Well,
not with my eyes anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's got its good points and it's got its bad points, but I don't think I'll ever give up, actual hard copies.
The real thing. I think it's better.
Thing.
Kindle's better for novels, to sit on a beach or something like that and read a novel.
Yeah. Books you don't want to keep. Yeah. Okay, well, let's start with your list. Now, the first book on your list was one that you said you picked up in the 90s at one of the early Mind, Body, Spirit festivals in London, which I remember very well because I used to go to them all. So the book is Moon Over Water, Meditation Made Clear with Techniques for Beginners and Initiates by Jessica Macbeth. And this book was published in 1990. So why did you pick up this one?
Oh, why do we ever do anything? I'd heard on a radio show, actually on Radio 4, that it was somebody had come over from America who was a coach. And I think in those days in England, we'd never heard of a coach. A coach was somebody that looked after a football team, or you went on it on a bus ride to the beach. So I was quite fascinated while I was doing whatever I was doing, probably looking after kids, to kind of listen in background mode. And this, right at the end, the woman, I think the interviewer said, well, if there's one thing that you really would advise anybody to do, what it would be? And she said meditation. And I thought it just rang true to me and it appealed to me. And I thought, this is something that's important. And I think in our lives, if we can listen to that small voice within, the intuition, it's banging there and it's kind of going, yeah, okay, come on, it's giving you that little prod. And that's what happened. And I kept thinking I must go and meditate. And I tried to find out and research about meditation courses. They're all hugely expensive and required several days, and I had small kids. Went to Mind, Body and Spirit, that used to be in Victoria in those days. And I bought all my crystals and listened to the music and all the rest of it. And there used to be a big bookstore right near the entrance. You probably remember it. And I went there and there was lots of angel cards and things like that. And I was just browsing and that book just pinged. It just spoke to me. There was something about the fact it was meditation techniques and it was simple for the beginner. That was rang, but also the picture on the front of the moon over water and the title. And I picked it up and kind of read the back and read the front and thought, and I had that kind of shiver down my arms. I knew I had to buy it. So that's what made me pick it up.
And did you find meditation easy from the outset?
I think it's one of those things that's the concept of it is really easy. Just sit still and breathe. But it's the doing of it that's not easy. Oh my goodness, at first it was really hard. But I remember I'd take the children to the park. They were little then. I'd take the children to the park. They'd be playing on the swings and what have you. And I would sit there over that summer reading the next one. And I'd go, okay, and I'd put my, timer on or something for 5 minutes and see if I could manage 5 minutes of this one. And slowly it got easier and easier. And I was able to extend those periods for longer and longer. But it's a bit like sort of playing a musical instrument or going to the gym. You can't expect to do it straight away. And that was one of the things I think it said in that book. It said if meditation was easy, we'd all be walking around meditating all the time. So yeah, it's an easy concept and it's something that you just have to stay dedicated to and practice. But oh my goodness, I'm very, very glad I did. I think in that book it said, if you meditate for 20 years, you'll really reap the benefits. And I have been meditating now for 21 years and I don't think I'd have got through the life I've had without being able to do that.
And you said that a few years after buying the book, you developed and facilitated a short meditation and relaxation course. So it must have inspired you.
It absolutely did. And I think at the time I was doing sort of I was learning guided meditations. I think I've learned very basic NLP techniques, and I was a Reiki master. And so I had this notion that, actually, I think it was probably true, but it was a naive notion. I wasn't trained as a therapist in those days, but I had this notion that a lot of people's problems were stress-based, particularly living in London, and that if they could just slow down and stop the mind for a bit and relax, they'd feel better. And I felt that I had a toolbox to be able to do that, because the techniques in Moon Over Water are simple, and you don't have to have any kind of initiation with any kind of guru or master. It's simple. So I thought, if it's so simple, I can teach some of these, and I can also do some guided meditation with people, and I can even give them a bit of distant healing and do some space clearing. And it was kind of me road testing and practicing with all these skills that I'd learnt in the early days. And had this group, I think it was, I can't remember, it was a midweek, over 6 weeks, and I repeated it a couple of times, and it went down really well, and lots of people got a lot from it and learned how to meditate. So it's great.
Did you? She wrote a sequel called Sun Over Mountain, and this one is meditation and imagery to heal oneself. Did you read that book?
Funnily enough, I do know she wrote the sequel, but I haven't read the book. I haven't read it. Maybe it's another one for the list.
Well, number 2 on your list appeared just last week as well, Creating Sacred Space with Feng Shui by Karen Kingston, which was published in 1996 in England. So tell us about that book and how you discovered Feng Shui and space clearing.
Okay, so when my daughter was small, she's coming up for 30 now, so we're talking quite a long time ago. When she was small, I heard about Feng Shui somewhere and wanted to investigate further. So there weren't many books about in those days, by the way. There was about 2 or 3 books on Feng Shui that you could buy. And I bought them all and started fiddling around with, wealth corners and putting crystals up and painting things different colours, and having this disastrous realisation that my bathroom was in the wealth corner and it was all going down the drain, things like this. So that was quite interesting. And then as I got a little bit further into that journey, I started to train and learn much more about it. And then somebody, I think it was on the Feng Shui Society, I was on the board of the Feng Shui Society in the very, very early days. They used to meet at Rudolf Steiner House in just off Regent's Park. And somebody said, well, if you're going to work with Feng Shui, you really need to understand energy. So you need to do Tai Chi. So I did Tai Chi and Qigong for a little bit, then went on to yoga. But they said no, and then that led into energy sensing. And then I bought the book and read it from cover to cover. I think there was another book around at the same time that talked about space clearing. And I really loved her approach because it was so gentle and because it was very Balinese and working with flowers and altars and candles. I really loved it. So I just kind of said, okay, well, let's have a go with this. Let's clear our house. And we moved house quite a lot as well when my kids were little, and often to old houses. And it would be fantastic to put this different energy in. And then she came and gave us a talk at the Feng Shui Society. So I remember going and I'm meeting her. It was quite a small, intimate group. And that was fantastic. And so she went into a lot more detail about that. And eventually I did some training and then took it from there. And I'm still space clear now. Rare, but I do still space clear. And that's actually what led to the ghost busting.
So yes, tell us about the ghost busting.
Well, it started with space clearing. So having learnt to space clear my own space, then I started doing friends. And then people would say, well, can I pay you? Can you come and do my house? So I would just be clearing houses. And then eventually, of course, you start cutting to the houses that have got the ghosty ghoulies in. And I had a friend who I'd space cleared her house and her practice. She was not a chiropractor, I think she was an osteopath. And then she said, well, I've got a flat that I rent out, and the tenants made a few complaints about noises and things there. Could you come and space clear? Okay, let's go in, find out. This was ages ago, and I arrived, and she didn't tell me anything except that the tenant had complained about some noises. And when I got there, I started sensing into the energy. And this was a huge, great, big old wardrobe in the corner of one of the bedrooms. And I just see it in my mind's eye. I don't see it like some people actually see something externally. I don't do that. I have a knowing and I see it inside. And I could see this dog scratching and I just saw the whole picture. And it was a little girl who had drowned in a large pond. The dog was her dog and was trying to save her, but the whole thing was slippery and muddy. So the dog had died and the little girl had died, but they were still in that trauma of the dog desperately trying to get the girl, and its scratching noises were inside this wardrobe, and that's what was making the noise. Anyway, so I discovered all of this and cleared it and thought, well, I'll have to clear it. So I remember I laid out an altar with candles and incense, and I've done prayers and called in energies and all this. There's a whole sort of ritual to be done. And I just knew I had to call in Archangel Michael and get these souls sent to the light. And then I realized they weren't going to ghosts. I didn't know they were dead. So I had to actually say to them, actually, you've died a very long time ago. The little girl was quite upset. I had to tell her that, Mom, where's my mum and dad? I said, they're up in heaven and they're waiting for you. And here's Archangel Michael, who's going to take you. When you're doing all of this, Sandie, if you've got a rational mind like I have, there's a part of you that's going, you're making this up. It's bonkers. Okay, you really do think I'm making this up. I'm getting paid for doing this. Anyway, I did the whole thing. Then the dog followed. And then I saw the parents waving. And I saw them go up to the light. And then the heavens opened and they went. And I finished the space clearing. And at the end, the woman said, well, what did you find? And I told her, and she said, oh, that's really interesting, because that's exactly where they heard the noises. And they said it sounded like a dog scratching. And furthermore, this apartment block had been built on the land of what used to be one of those grand old houses, which had a huge garden with a pool, an ornamental pool in it. So then you think, I couldn't have made all of that up. So that was the beginning of it. But it got sort of, I think we're given these challenges, and if we overcome them, we're given more to stretch us. So it got to be more and more and more.
Yeah.
And eventually one day we were on holiday in Sussex, and we took our kids to the battle where the Battle of Hastings was, and I just got this sort of almost like a tap on the shoulder. You've got a space clear battle. I said, don't be ridiculous. No, you've got a space clear battle. And I could smell the battle and hear it and see it there. And I just remember working with sacred mantras and angel names. And again, I think my ex-husband thought I was mad. The children tried to disown me. They walked ahead. I was doing it under my breath. Again, you think you're mad. You're just making this up. And at the end, we were about to leave. And then I felt a presence behind me. And when I looked round, it was somebody on horseback. And he just went, thank you. And I just saw all these horses and people just flowing up. And again, you think you're mad. And I think the most sort of hectic, I'd say, to use a South African word they use a lot, ones have been since I've been in South Africa. Some of the things I've seen here, I don't do space clearings very often. I only go when I'm called to do them. And a lot of the time I do them for free. And I've done land, and I've done 2 properties here, which were really, because I think the history of colonialism and all sorts of horrible things happening with slavery, but also that indigenous witch doctors and sangomas and shamans have their rituals as well. So there's overlays of different cultures, but it's new. Whereas England's very ancient land, so much has happened, and it's always think about things composting down into the land, whereas South Africa's relatively new, so it's all fresh on there. The energy's just fresh in there, so you can sometimes see some quite horrible things. That's ghost.
Don't do it now, really, unless you're
every so often somebody will call me up and say, oh, I've heard you're really good at space cleaning, would you come and do my house? And I just go, no, I'm sorry, I'm too busy, please just use a shaman, sangoma. And occasionally, if they really nag, I'll give them a ridiculous price, and they usually go away. But if I'm meant to do it, I'll know, and I'll just go, yeah, I'm meant to do this. Tell me, I'll come along. I'll do it. Yeah. So, well, there's lots of things that I do, but I don't officially do, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. And I know many people who do space cleaning. Not many. I know a few people, usually exceptionally gifted Reiki masters and people who really, are very sensitive to energy and are very good at clearing the space. Yeah. And ancient battle sites as well. Yeah. Okay, so number 3, you've sneaked in all 3 here. Conversations with God, the entire trilogy by Neale Donald Walsch. Obviously, this book comes up again and again. What did it do for you?
Gosh, it's such a long time ago that I read it. or read the three of them. I don't even remember fully all the details of those books. I remember that it was a letter that he wrote when he was angry and he was in a bad place, and that God answered him. I know that the first book was more about personal stuff. And I think he seemed to remember he was quite religious and he had some hang-ups about a few things and God put him right on there. The middle one was more sort of to do with politics, and the third one was more global and cosmic. And that's kind of all I really remember. But what was important about it was the sort of confirmation that when you hear things in your head, you're not going mad. That I wasn't going mad when I was space clearing the dog or the battle or any of the places here. It really is true. And that when I used to hear things, people say things in my head, I wasn't going mad, because obviously as a psychotherapist, and you think I'm a psychotherapist with voices in my head. So you want to keep that a bit hush. But just the idea that we are intuitive beings, we do sense and know things, and we can hear things. It was like an affirmation and a confirmation. And I think as well, a lot of the things that he wrote about in that book just made sense to me. It felt like almost like a coming home. It was almost like somebody patting me on the back and going, it's okay. It's okay to be you. It's okay to be on this path. It's okay. Because I've come from a family of very rational thinkers. My father was an engineer and I've got 4 brothers and they all think I'm the wild, wacky, woo-woo one. So you do tend to doubt yourself then. So when a book like that comes along, it's like a lovely confirmation of things. And of course, I probably learned things from it. But what happened with those books was that I started channeling. Well, I don't know whether it was God, but it was definitely a voice that sounded like God. And I still have a voice that talks to me and tells me things occasionally when I need them, like when I've got to space clear. And so I would be reading, and I remember specifically reading on the tube train on the way to work, because that was one of my big reading spaces when you're really busy, when you're sitting on the tube, you've got your book there. And I'd have to keep stopping and looking up because the voice would be expanding on everything in the book. And he'd be going, oh, but this and this. And so by the time I got to the third book, it took me an enormous amount of time to read it, because I just had to keep stopping at every paragraph to have it expanded on, which is bizarre. I probably should have written notes on what the expansions were, but I never did.
Yeah, that would have been interesting, a record of the commentary. Yeah. Did anybody disagree with what had been said? Did anyone say, no, that's not right?
I think I seem to remember there were a couple of things that saying he hasn't quite got that right. That's not quite how it is.
And I wonder what Neil would say if you told him that.
I know. I wouldn't even be able to point to which bits that I had those revelations about. So, yeah.
So book number 4, Power versus Force, David Hawkins. Yes, that comes up again and again as well. Made a big impact on a lot of people.
It's comforting in a way, isn't it, that it comes up again and again, because it's, again, confirmation that it really is good. And I think there's lots of famous books that I could have put in here, and probably Conversations with God and this one were biggies, and I kind of knew that when I put them in. This, for me, when I started reading it, I was skeptical at the very beginning when he talks about how the accuser people and he's healing them. Again, I don't have the book anymore. I haven't, because it's gone, obviously, with all the books that went. And it's another one that I wish I still had. But what fascinated me about that was how it was, consciousness was measurable. So then I thought, well, if consciousness is measurable, you can measure anything, whether you're doing, a training course, or whether you're reading a book, or whether you're listening to music, or you can choose to go for things that have a higher vibration, and then surely that's going to raise your vibration. So then I would do things like I'd muscle test, whether I should go to this course or not, and what vibration on that scale that he has, 1 to 100, where does it go? And then I had this kind of notion that I wasn't going to read anything if it was under 600 and things like that. And I used to muscle test people. And I had a friend at the time who was teaching like an Egyptian Reiki and Egyptian wisdom and healing Reiki. And she said, I want to teach this. It's going to raise everybody up beyond 600. We'd muscle test. But it was really great just to know and understand that consciousness is ever expanding. I think he actually goes beyond what he's saying, because he says 1,000 is the level of Christ consciousness. And I would say now, with a greater understanding, it goes way beyond that. It can go infinitely. So once you've gone beyond this limited spectrum of life, you can go infinitely. And I think when you then tap in and connect to higher beings of light, you can be muscle test infinitely. which is quite interesting. So
yeah, and it is a fascinating thing. I know somebody who has done something slightly different, and he was actually on. He was one of our contributors and a guest, a wonderful man called Jeff Vanderkloot. And I had a conversation with Jeff before we started the book club, and I said, wouldn't it be fun if we could actually, calibrate the consciousness of each of these books? So people would say, oh, well, that one's, a 600 and that one's only 3. I'll read that one. But the way he does it is a completely different way. And he said, the problem is, he said, the books that, would calibrate to the, and he didn't go high. He actually went the other way. So it was like minus numbers. But, for the sake of just understanding this, the books that would calibrate the highest would be so complex that people probably wouldn't be able to read them.
That's an interesting thing, you see. I do agree with that to some degree. I do.
Yeah. I had visions of doing this like 5-star thing. Oh, this book's a 5-star. That one's a 4-star. Or this particular list is a 5-star. But no, we decided
get too esoteric. Yeah. And I noticed that as well when I worked that, because that's exactly what I did. If I bought a book, or I was even in a bookshop, I'd get my dowser out, or I'd do a muscle test like this, and I would, if I could find a book that was 900 or something like that, I would, right, I'm getting this, and you wouldn't necessarily read it. But what I found really interesting was music that calibrates highly, because that's you can put that in the background and play it, can't you? And it's raising your vibration.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good thing. I wouldn't have thought of that. Yeah. Okay, book number 4, Emotions and the Enneagram by Margaret Feng Keys, Working Through Your Shadow Life Script. I find the Enneagram a little bit hard to understand. There are so many different books on it that, come at it from different angles that it's got me flummoxed a bit. So tell me about this and why it was important to you.
Well, there's a lot of facets to that. The first thing is that I agree with you about what's happened to the Enneagram, but the way that I teach it, because I actually teach Enneagram in the Bone Circle, we look at it intuitively, and we say that the Enneagram is actually the structure of your ego, or the structure of your small self, and then you have a greater self or a greatness, which has a completely different structure of love, truth, and service. So if you realize that the Enneagram is originally a mystical Sufi wisdom teaching, and you go back to its roots, it's incredibly powerful. But what's happened is it's been taken by, first of all, psychologists to kind of try and pigeonhole people, and then by corporates, which is even worse, because the whole point of the Enneagram is to transcend it. And then what's happened is it's got turned on its head by corporates who go, oh, well, you're a whatever it is, you're a 4, you're the creative, we're going to stick you in the creative department. And then it's pushing you further into that life orientation. So one of the reasons I like that particular book on the Enneagram is it's more true to the original concept of the Enneagram, the 9 points, because it goes right back into how those points are derived. So those 9 points are derived because there's an initial triangle at the core of them. And that initial triangle is basically the points of fight, flight, and freeze, which is the human being's response to any danger. There's only those 3 responses. That's all there are. So it's either going to be anger if you're in fight, or fear if you're in flight, or depression, actually, if you're in freeze, because it means that you're handing over your power to somebody else and hoping that you'll get saved. So you're subjugating yourself, if you like, and that can set up depression. So when you understand it like that, and you understand how the actual structure underneath the Enneagram, it's very powerful. And when you see that it's to do with the shadow, and it's to do with early conditioning, and that you can overcome it and rise beyond it, as I said, it's very powerful. So the reason I like that book is it's quite true to the original, and it's also written by a therapist, a Jungian therapist. So she understands the psyche. So she's not, I'll give an example of another thing that's happened with the Enneagram. The originals, they didn't have names for those points. They just had programs. So it would be something like the program of excellence with melancholia or something, which is the Enneagram 4, or the program of excellence with fear of failure or something, which is the 3. And then it kind of got named by people. So it would be something, the classic one is the 8. The 8 point is, I can't remember what the original program is, but it's all anger based. And it used to be called the boss. Well, then it got to the challenger, and then it got to sort of like the leader. So you've gone from it being somebody who can be quite psychopathic and bossy, who's got some real power issues, to the leader. And how did that happen? It's because things have got massaged, and I think that's why it's so confusing. And that's why I love that book, because it brings it back home to what it's really about.
Interesting. I might look at that one then and see if I can master it at last.
It's quite an old book, but it's a goodie.
Yeah. The next book is one that, as a practicing hypnotherapist, you were fascinated. And that's The Journey of the Souls, Case Studies of Life Between Lives by Michael Newton, which has cropped up quite a few times. The first question I want to ask you before you talk about the book, did you then start practicing this?
I had to give it a go.
You had to, yeah. Doing regression with your clients, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I already did past life work. I didn't, most of the time in the way that I worked with hypnosis is I never told anybody whether to go back into a past life or this life. I would just frame it this way. I would talk to their subconscious and then say, the person reports to me that they've got this problem. Can we work on this? Yes or no? And the subconscious would say yes or no. And then I say, would it be appropriate to go way back into the past to bring forward information, help this person to understand why they have this problem? And they go, yes. And 9 times out of 10, they go back to a past life. Although I could do past life regression as well if somebody actually wanted that. And so it was fascinating to do some between life regressions and also have one done myself as well. What I really loved about that book, it might have been one of the few that I kept actually. What I loved about that book was that it was very clean the way it's done, because it's all case studies. The whole book is just case studies. And he explains at the beginning, as any good hypnotherapist, that you have to be very careful and clean with your language. So you can't even say, is it raining, say, because then you've put the suggestion in that it's raining. You have to go, what's the weather like? So you never lead the witness, so to speak. And that's what he does all the way through. He never, ever says, oh, are you seeing this? He says, what can you see? Report back, which is exactly the way that I was trained. And then you know that you're getting that person's highest truth of what they're seeing. And then the fact that it all mirrored so many other people was such a fabulous confirmation. And again, I don't know, a confirmation that some of the work that you do is valid as well, because we know that past lives taking somebody back into a past life can be really, really powerful. Somehow it just heals the problem quite quickly. And I always knew and believed in past lives and that things that had happened in a past life would affect us now. So then it was fascinating to see that soul's journey between the two. And I think it's very comforting for people who've lost loved ones. I've often recommended it to people who are grieving. So they know the soul's gone on. And because there's that lovely bit at the beginning, I think, that where he says somebody's died and he's in hypnosis and he's just left the body. And he says he's standing around and he's waiting 3 days or whatever it is. And he can see his loved ones crying and he wants to comfort them, but he can't. And just a lovely thing for people to know that their loved ones still exist. They're just on the other side of the veil.
Indeed. Now, the next book is not very well known at all, and yet it won its place on your 10 best over Autobiography of a Yogi, the Kybalion, the Gita, and a few books on yoga. And the book is Jem's Story, A Spiritual Journey by Joost,
I think it's called. Pronounced,
Joost Bockhoven.
I would say it's Joost Bockhoven. Yeah.
Okay.
You've
got the accent. I haven't.
Yeah.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, I know. It's all those other books. There's lots of books, as we've said, that come up again and again for people. But like you were saying about the muscle testing and the looking at the numbers, some of those books stay on people's bookshelves forever and they never actually read them. So it's all very well to recommend a book, but unless somebody's actually going to say, oh, I think I'd like to read that, and actually buy it and actually read it, then it's not actually moving them forward in any way.
Yeah.
And what I loved about this book was that it's a story. That's the first thing. It's a narrative, which is so refreshing after you've ploughed through things like Power versus Force and, those sort of, or Course in Miracles or Autobiography of a Yogi. You're ploughing through things. This was a narrative and it's beautifully written. And that's one of the things that appealed to me. It's so beautifully written. It's very timeless. It's written in first person, and it's just this journey of Jem, and we don't really even know where Jem lives or where, what time or era or what country, but it could be transposed anywhere. But the whole of the way, it's slightly tongue-in-cheek in a way, because it's revealing a spiritual journey from the different perspectives of Jem and her master. And there's just this lovely bit, because Jem is so innocent, but she's there and she understands it. And the master's got caught in his stuff. And it's that parable, that the master is always the teacher, and the teacher is always the student, and the student is always the teacher. Jem, as the student, is teaching her master. It's so gentle and beautifully written the way it unfolds. It's a joy to read it. It's one of those spiritual books that you can just, I don't know, it's a wonderful one to take on holiday, or, snuggle up on a cold winter's evening by the fire with a cup of cocoa and read that book, because it's heartwarming. It's really, really heartwarming and moving and gentle and lovely. So that's why it's on there. Easy to read.
So you described the next book as like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it, and you found it fascinating. So tell us why.
Is that the neuroscience?
This is Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife by Eben Alexander. A book which actually has, there's a lot of controversy around this book, with some people saying, well, he wasn't completely authentic in what he wrote, but who knows? Only he does.
That's it. We don't know. I don't know really why I chose this, but I think it is because of who he is, because there's lots of probably better books on near-death experience. Anita Morjani and others that have had near-death experiences. There's lots and lots and lots of books on near-death experiences. And I think if you've been on a spiritual path, you will probably have come across near-death and have avidly watched videos or listened to interviews or read books, and you'll know what people are saying. So it's not so much what he's saying, but the fact it's him who's saying it, and he put his career on the line in doing it. So whether everything he says is true or not, or what, the fact is he was a neurosurgeon who didn't believe in an afterlife, who did not believe his patients who had had near-death experiences, who was absolutely adamant that it was just a chemical reaction in their brain and there was nothing out there. And he was absolutely stoic in his stance. And that very much reminds me of my brothers and my father, how they're just not going to budge. They don't have ears to hear. It doesn't matter what evidence you present them with or what you show them, they're just not interested. For example, my brother lives in Dorset, right near what's been some fabulous crop circles. And I keep saying to him, there's this amazing crop circle. Oh yeah, what do you mean, oh yeah? Oh, we don't want to go see that, can't be bothered. No questioning what it is. And I think he probably thinks there's two drunk people going out with a board and flattening them. And even if it was, they're amazing geometries. Go and have a look. Amazing pieces of artwork. What an installation on your doorstep. Go see it. But there's none of that curiosity isn't there. And I really felt that that's what Eben Alexander was like. He had this kind of closed mind. And I think that a lot of people who are in academia, say, who are in the medical, not necessarily.
Well, they're trained that way, aren't they?
They're trained that way. They're trained to look at the body as a piece of machinery. And I think the deeper they go in their specialism, the more they're furrowing into a deep channel and closing out everything else. So that's what fascinated me about the book, was his turnaround from having that experience. So whatever the controversy is around the truth of what he's written, What he wrote did make sense to me from everything that I've read and understood and learned, and nothing clashed, made me think, oh, that's not right. So I felt it had a ring of truth to it, but just great that somebody like that has written the book and stepped outside of the norms and the conventions, and would have probably taken flack for that. And that's a brave thing to do, isn't it?
It is a brave, very courageous thing to do. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why I like it, I think. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Number 9, The Heroine's Journey, Woman's Quest for Wholeness by Maureen Murdoch.
Yeah.
So this is a counterpoint to The Hero's Journey.
Yeah. I love this book. It seems to resonate with so many women, particularly now, although it was written quite a while back. I think it was in the 80s. I actually only read it about 10 years ago. So I read it as a secondhand book late, but so I worked with the hero's journey anyway, because that's part of the Bone Circle training, is we all go on a hero's journey externally when we go for things that we want. So, and I'd read a couple of Joseph Campbell things, and I'd watched a lot of interviews. I watched that whole series that he did, The Power of Myth. And so I was quite fascinated with the hero's journey and the myth and the idea of the steps to the hero's journey and the symbolism of it as well. So that was always really fascinating. And then when this one came along called The Heroine's Journey, I remember thinking, well, how can you have a heroine's journey? It's the same journey, whether you're a man or a woman, you take the same journey. And a friend of mine actually who said, no, read it. So I did. And it turns out that she actually met Joseph Campbell and challenged him over the hero's journey. And she said, what about women? And he said, oh, no, women don't take the hero's journey. The women are the boon. Women, it's like Penelope sitting doing the tapestry and I'm doing it waiting for Odysseus to come back. Women don't go on the journey. And she said, well, that's no good because modern woman does. So that's how it all kind of starts. And then she plotted this whole heroine's journey, which I think is hugely valuable for any woman who's been in really this place that Katie in my book Red Dress is in, where they're trying to juggle career and family and children and husband and everything, and they're burning out. And that's what the heroine's journey is about, really. It says that we get wounded in relation to the feminine. And then there's the mother-daughter. We reject the feminine. We reject the mother. But mother is symbolic not only of your actual mother, but Mother Earth and anything that the mother is about, which is nurturing. And all of these values, which are actually hugely important in society, we deem as weak. We don't want to be, nurturing and caring and looking after and sewing and gardening and preparing food. And we see that as less than in some way. So we kind of divorce ourselves from our own femininity to go on the road of trials and go on the hero's journey and make it with the men. And women do. We've broken the glass ceiling and women have been hugely successful. But what can happen is to go on that journey, we have to go into our masculine. Now, obviously, we've all got both masculine and feminine energies, and the idea is to get them in balance. But we go further into the masculine, which is all about doing, and being out there and rational. We have to fit into that world of work, the way that it's set up, because it's formerly been mostly men. So then you're stepping into a world that's been formulated by the masculine. So you're shaping yourself into that, going on the road of trials, just like the men. But you also probably want to have children and get married and have a house and still do lovely things, women-y things, soft things, feminine things. And it clashes. And so you're trying to do it all. And then you end up becoming burnt out. A lot of people become burnt out, or feel dry, or feel there's more to life than this, or feel that it's a Pyrrhic victory somehow. They've got what they wanted and it's empty inside. And then there's this endless urgent search to reconnect with the feminine. And that means going within to face the demons within and to reconnect and heal all of that. And I think a lot of women go through that during menopause, but then a lot of women take HRT, and so they rob themselves of the rite of passage of menopause, which reconnects them back to their divine wisdom. Because I think wisdom is part of the divine feminine.
Yeah, absolutely. Your last book you describe as a complete teaching, not just a book. And this complete teaching has become a way of life. But when you first came across it, or you read an excerpt from it, you found it arcane and inaccessible. So why did you keep going?
I think spirit just pushes you, don't they? But when I first came across an excerpt from it, I was doing
well, let's just say what the book is, just so that people know. It's my fault. It's the Book of Knowledge, The Keys of Enoch, by Dr. James J. Hurtak, and it is, inaccessible. Was exactly what I thought.
Most people do. It's one of those ones that sits on the shelf alongside Course in Miracles. So a lot of healing modalities have come out of that book. Magnified healing is one of them. Guidon Heart was another one that was done by an Indian lady. I think it used to be called something like something to do with Melchizedek, and I can't remember. And then the third one is the Reconnective Healing by Eric Pearl, and all three have come from the Keys of Enoch. So it had been in the sort of periphery, and they say that you come to the keys comes to you when you're ready. And so I had this excerpt from the book, which was part of the training for magnified healing, and it was talking about these 5 higher bodies, not the 5 etheric bodies, but these other bodies, and I couldn't make head nor tail of it. And I remember in the class we were sat in a circle and we each read a paragraph, and we might as well have been reading a complete, double Dutch. It didn't make sense, and I actually dared to say, excuse me, I don't understand this. And the teacher said, no, nobody understands it, it's fine, it's just coding, you just read it, we have to read it as part of it. So well, that's a bit of a cheat, isn't it, just to read it, not really understand it. So I tried to kind of grapple with this sheet of paper that was given to me and still couldn't really get it. Tried to go as deep as I could with it and felt that I was just drowning in it just feels like you can go down too many rabbit holes and you can get lost in the teaching. Then when I went to, the lady that ran Magnified Healing, she was American, and she was coming to Europe to initiate masters, and it was in Belgium, I think, or somewhere, and I went for the initiation. And when I had the final kind of, whatever mastery or whatever the level was, I don't even know anymore. I don't even use it anymore. It's all part of the journey, isn't it? I think all of these things were just growing. She said to me, you're a true master, Bridget, and you need to get the Keys of Enoch. So I thought, oh, well, all right, okay. And it makes sense because I keep coming across it. I'd read Eric Pearl's book, The Reconnection, and that mentioned it. I kept coming across it, and I thought, okay, the universe is telling me something, let's get this book. So I actually didn't realize you could buy it from the website, and I started to try and find this book, and nobody had it, not even Watkins, I don't think. And eventually I found a secondhand copy on Amazon, and I bought it, and it arrived while I was on holiday. And I got back, and when you get back from holiday, there's a huge pile of posts that the neighbours kindly put on your kitchen table. And this it's a big book. It's about the size of a Bible. So this great big cardboard Amazon box that arrived, and I took this book out, and I just had goosebumps all over, just looking at the cover, and started to go through this thing. And I just absolutely knew without a shadow of a doubt that however complex it looked and however arcane and inaccessible it was, my hairs were standing on end, and I could not put that book down, to the degree that my kids, who were younger then, and my ex-husband were going, are we having anything to eat? Are you going to help us unpack this suitcase? What are you doing? Are we putting the heating on? Who's making tea? Everybody was, unpacking from holiday and rediscovering home, and I was just sitting at the kitchen table, still in my coat, reading this book. I'm not even reading it, just flicking through and looking at the pictures and looking at what's called the glyph pages, which are the actual keys. And I just wanted to know more. I just wanted to lap it up and wanted to understand it, and then realized that I actually went back to the woman in America, and she said, no, you have to go to study group. So I found that there was a study group in those days, it's not anymore, but there was a study group at the Friends Meeting House opposite Euston Station in London. And it was on the last Thursday of the month. And I just couldn't do it because I was teaching on the Thursday. So I had to wait until that course was over, and then I joined, and I've never looked back since. I absolutely loved it from day one. And the minute you go to a study group, you start to understand it. You start just get the fingertips in there, like hanging on by the very fingertips, should I say. And yeah, now it's 15 years later, and I now facilitate a study group, and I still don't understand it. In fact, the more I read and the more I study, the more I think I don't understand. But the truth is, actually, tomorrow morning, I'm doing a basic introduction for new people. So when I do that, I now realize that people are going, hang on a minute, it's going too fast. I don't understand all of this. And I don't think we understand how much we understand, because the keys themselves are unlocking our consciousness and unlocking things in the mind so that we get to understand much better. But you've got to start with a whole new vocabulary. There's a whole Enochian vocabulary that you've got to get your head around. And even normal words that you think you might know what they are, like spirit or spiritual or soul or Kabbalah, means something completely different in the key. So you can kind of constantly referring to the glossary to remember. I remember for years, ages, I couldn't remember even what the key meant, a key, because it doesn't mean a key like just that unlocks. It does unlock, but even now I can't exactly remember what his words are.
What's the biggest thing that you've taken from it?
Just a massively vast cosmology. I mean, it's a vast book. It's actually written on 7 levels, from the subatomic to the superluminal. So you're trying. This is why it's inaccessible, because it's actually trying to implode the constructs of your mind to open up to a higher consciousness. It's actually extending and unlocking your consciousness. So just understanding why we're here and who we are and where we've come from and where we're going. And the much, much bigger picture of a greater cosmology, and that we're just a very, 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 very small part of that. And having a much greater understanding of scripture. I didn't have a religious upbringing. I wasn't into church or Bible, but to go back to scripture now and read it with the eyes of the keys is fascinating and amazing. It's one of now my favorite things to read. So just, it feels like such a vast understanding of higher consciousness, of the divine, of the Godhead, of angelics, of mathematics and sacred geometries. And it's also what we call a capstone teaching. So it encompasses other teachings. So in there is Egyptian things. In there is the Tibetan Bon tradition. In there is Sanskrit. In there is some Christian stuff around the cosmic Christ. There's also a lot of Hebrew and Kabbalah and Tree of Life and that sort of thing. So it's exhaustive and extensive, and so you never get bored with it. There's always something new in it. There's always another thing you're learning and adding to your wisdom. And I think particularly now with the crazy times we're going through, it gives you great comfort because you know there's a greater plan and a bigger plan. It's very precise, the keys. It's scientific. It's the science of spirituality. So it's very, very precise. It's not a poetry. It's not a lullaby to something. It's not just what somebody thinks. It's a very, very, very profound teaching. And I think it's the highest truth that I've ever come across anywhere, to the degree that I rarely read anything else now in terms of spiritual books.
So does it have something to do with, or was it based on the Emerald Tablet?
No, Emerald Tablets is quite different. I did study that as well. Yeah, it's very different.
So did Hurtak channel this piece of work?
No, he didn't. He's very at pains to let you know this. So Dr. Hurtak was a scientist and teaching at the time in California when he had his experience. He was 33 and he'd already studied comparative religion. He'd already studied scripture. He was fluent in Greek and Hebrew and all of these classical languages as well. And he had an experience when he was about 16 of a light that was in his room that was like the Merkaba, and he was told it was the Merkaba, and he wanted to understand this. And so he went and studied all these ancient scriptures. He studied the Nag Hammadi and the Dead Sea Scrolls and all of these Eastern philosophies as well. And he asked to know more, and he spent all that time studying. And then at the age of 33, he actually had a paraphysical experience where he was taken off planet. He disappeared for 3 days. Nobody, he bought everything. He was not here. And he was taken in the light body of Enoch to the gates of Orion, the stargates of Orion. It all sounds fantastical, but when you meet him, you know it's true. And when you read the keys, you just know it's true, because for example, the numbers in the keys, they put it through a computer and they said no human being could have written this, just the way the numbers lock together. That's not even anything else. But he was taken off the planet and he was taken to this stargate. And from there, Enoch himself, who was the Enoch that was in the Bible, that wrote the book of Enoch, Enoch could go no further, and he was taken in the Merkaba of Metatron into the throne space of the Father. And he was given these his mind was accelerated to understand it because he couldn't have understood it. And these scrolls of light were put into his third eye. all sounds fantastical. It really sounds fantastical. When I'm talking to you like this on an interview, you think, oh my goodness, it's wrong. But, having studied it for 15 years, I can tell you without any shadow of a doubt, I absolutely believe him. He came back and was told he had to write the Keys of Enoch. And he said it could have been like the Encyclopedia Britannica. He could have written absolutely reams, and he realized he had to get it down into a small book. So actually, a small book, it's like the Bible, but then there are expositions to help you understand the keys. And he's also done expositions on all of the books of the Bible and all of Nag Hammadi and all of these other amazing things like the Pistis Sophia, which is a fabulous, fabulous teaching of the sacred feminine. He is amazing, amazing energy and an amazing man to be around, and quite very academic, very scientific. And he, again, a bit like Abraham Alexander, he was ostracized from the scientific community because they thought he'd gone mad. They literally thought he's gone mad, he thinks he's been taken up to the higher heavens and been given this teaching. But what's really interesting, there are 64 keys of science within the keys, 54 of which are in the original book. And then he was told that the last 10 would only be given when the consciousness of man was right. And they were started to be given 6 years ago. This year is key 406. So that since 1973, which is when he had his experience and people thought he was mad, a lot of things within the keys have been verified by science, including things like string theory. So, I mean, loads and loads and loads of things. The latest one was the last year's Nobel Prize winner of black holes in space or something. That was in the keys in 1973. So it's all sort of coming together now. I think it's really of our time. I just find it fascinating. I love it. Couldn't really live without it.
Is that your favourite of all 10?
Yeah, definitely.
And have you incorporated...
It's not that it's my favourite. I think it's the most long-lasting, the highest truth, and the one that will keep me going forever. Whereas the others, not that I didn't... I loved Gem, for example. That was one of my favourites as well, because it's so beautifully written. But it's not a book that I'll go back to and read and read and read and learn and learn and learn and grow from, whereas the Keys is. This is why I said it's more of a teaching and a way of life. Sorry,
so did you incorporate some of that into your Bone Circle program?
There's a little bit, but I didn't want to go too far with it, partly because it's copywritten to Dr. Hurtak, and partly because it is quite esoteric, and it isn't everybody's cup of tea. And so I think you could put more people off than, by putting too much of things from the keys. But what I do use is I use a lot of the sacred names. We've been given a lot of sacred names, and the vibrations are really, really high, and they're absolutely beautiful. And I do use the sacred names with the Bone Circle. We use those for opening.
Explain to us what the Bone Circle is then.
The Bone Circle. The Bone Circle is an absolutely unique and transformative training that I've developed and created and road tested. And I'm actually in the process of upgrading it completely and putting it online. But because I want to simplify it, it got too complicated. And that's interesting because we were talking about if things are too complicated, people aren't going to take them on board. And I think sometimes it's better to simplify. Yes. So the Bone Circle is really the intersection of three areas of my expertise. One being that whole kind of spiritual world that I've been in. I used to teach yoga as well, so meditation yoga, but also space clearing and sacred space and being fully present and mindfulness and those sorts of stuff. Also things like drinking water and eating well, lifestyle choices and the vibrations of mantras, those sorts of things. That's all part of the Bone Circle. And for me, that's about being fully present in the moment and being connected. And then I've had all the years of being a therapist, a psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist and healer, which is all about understanding the psyche and unhooking things from the past. So that's where the Enneagram would come in, is understanding your Enneagram and understanding it's not actually really you. It's only your conditioning. So you don't define yourself by your Enneagram. So to work with unhooking the past and understanding the psyche and understanding your conditioning so it doesn't trip you up and sabotage you is actually what that's really about. And there's a few simple techniques that I add into the Bone Circle for people to actually be able to unhook things from the past. So that's about the past. And then the bulk of the Bone Circle is actually about creating the future. But you can't create the future unless you can be fully present in the now and you've unhooked the past. that influences it. So we tap into intuition at will. So it's a learning technique that I give you, which is a meditation, to tap well, once you've done the meditation, you can tap at will into your intuition. So you're tapping into your intuitive knowing at will, and following that and learning to listen to your intuitive mind, your intuitive voice, your greater self that's trying to live life and express through the smaller self. And that's leading you and guiding you to your purpose, your soul purpose, but the life you'd love, the things that you'd really love, the things that you've denied yourself, the things that you've conditioned yourself against. So it's about creating. And the reason it's a circle is we can't do it alone. So it goes back to the hero's journey. No hero goes on their journey without all their helpers. There's always their helpers around them. And so you can't, it is a hero's journey to go and do the bone circle training, because you have to step out of your comfort zone. You have to look at your stuff, and you have to step out to do what it is you've come in to do. And that's why it's life-changing.
And
so
why,
you do it with
why
friends.
bone? Why bone?
Yeah, bones. It's, at the time I was reading or rereading Women Who Run with the Wolves, because I was thinking of setting it as a text for because initially that training was for women, and it talked a lot about the bones in there. But before that, I actually worked intuitively to get the name. So I tuned in intuitively to that name, and I thought it was going to be something, like, I don't know, wisdom keepers or something, I don't know, angelic realms or something fluffy. And it came out as bone circle. It was very, very witchy. What I realized is the bones are, it's like going back down to the bare bones. So you strip back down to the bones and build up from the bones. Yeah. The bones are always there. But also, if you think about the shaman, they throw the bones to predict the future. And the bones are the structure. Now, in the bone circle, we talk a lot about structure. And the bones are the structure of our body. And they're the last thing to go. You've still got your DNA in the bones when everything else is gone and you're in the grave. So they're long lasting as well. So there's a lot of reason for calling it bone circle.
Got it. Okay, so tell us about your novel. You published your debut novel just a couple of months ago, published by John Hunt, and it is fiction, but it is loosely based on your own life.
It is indeed.
And you've woven in quite a few spiritual teachings, principles in there?
Yes, I have, yeah. So Red Dress, a novel, is a novel, and you can take it at different levels. So you can just take it as a fun novel about a woman who lives in London, in West London. She's married to somebody who's not a very nice person, got 2 kids, and she's a therapist. And I was a therapist, and I did live in West London, but not where she lives. I do have 2 children as well, and there's a few things about her that are like me. I do like chocolates, and so does she. I do like driving fast, and so does she. And there's loosely some of the things that happen in her life happen to me. Her soul contract is mine, and I have done aura soma and some of those things that she does. But otherwise, she's not me. She is fictitious. She's fictionalized, and she's very new and green in her spiritual journey. So she's doing it with trepidation, sitting on the fence with the cynical voice. Oh, should I go or shouldn't I? Which obviously isn't me, because I've been jumped straight into it like a duck to water, or a fish to water. So she's not me in that respect. And then there's other characters within the book that could also be seen as me. She's got a therapist supervisor, Terry, and that could be seen as me. And her best friend Shanti, who's spiritual and knows everything about everything spiritual, could also be me. But they're all actually fictional. So you can see it as a story about a woman who's stressed out in a successful life, and she's empty inside. She's lost who she is, and she's lost sight of her values and what makes her tick. And she embarks on a journey to rediscover her true self. And she does that through seeing her supervisor for therapy sessions and embarking on this spiritual path, which she's a bit cynical about and not sure about anyway. And she comes across these new and wonderful, wacky friends. So you can see it as that. You can see it as a study of relationship dynamics. There are quite toxic relationship dynamics within the story. So you can just look at it at that level. You can look at it as at the psychology level of it, or you can look at it as a spiritual journey, because it essentially is a spiritual journey. She goes on a spiritual journey, and everything in Red Dress is authentic and real. So everything that she does, whether that's the soul contract or the aura soma, or whether it's Reiki, or she meditates as well, she does yoga, everything that she does is an authentic thing. So we're watching somebody embark on a spiritual journey of awakening to find themselves. And we're watching her take that journey, take the pitfalls, wonder whether this is true or not, or whether it's real or not. And so for the reader, you can either just take that as a story, or you can say, actually, I would like to do something similar. I'd like to have a spiritual journey. Maybe I should do this or that or the other, or this particular bit of the book interests me and I'm going to find out more. And you can go Google that and find out more. But hopefully I've put all of that in a fun and accessible way. I mean, it's funny in places. I lost sight of it being funny by the time it had all been edited and rewritten and all the rest of it. And you just think, was that ever funny? But friends of mine who've now read it have said, oh, I've actually burst out laughing at this bit. I loved it. So yeah, it's funny, it's serious, it's sad, and it's...
Why the red dress?
I didn't know what I was going to call the book until towards the end of it. Originally, it started off as a working title of Alchemy by Numbers, and everybody thought it was about numerology. So I thought, well, I need to change this. And I came up with a couple of names, and I happened to mention it to a few friends of mine. And one lady went, oh, red dress, that's great. Oh, I'd buy a book called Red Dress. So the reason it's called Red Dress is that the central character, Katie, the protagonist, is working through these things called orosoma bottles, which are helping to clear her energetically. And she gets to have to wear the colours of the bottles. Now, that was okay when they're kind of quite nice colours, like I think one's blue and white. But when it's kind of magenta and lime green, it doesn't really suit her and it's awful. So she's wearing all these awful colours. And then it gets to the point where she's worked through all the bottles and she's free to wear whatever colour she wants. And she realises it's gone, and she opens her wardrobe door thinking, I can wear anything. And she's trying to choose an outfit to go out that evening. And as she's scanning down, she can't decide. And she hears a voice in her head and it says, red dress. So she wears the red dress, and you have to read the book to find out what happens. It's quite a turning point, actually, in the story.
Okay. Wow. Well, your bone circle work sounds very interesting. And I know that you are very interested in working with women, circles of women. And I think circles of women seems to be something that is coming to the fore quite a bit at the moment. So if somebody wants to work with you in this circle, just tell us, what does it entail and how long does it take? And how do they do that?
Okay, so because I'm in the process of doing it, well, sort of upscaling it really and putting it online, it will be slightly different. The original training was actually a 12 sessions over a year. But what I want to do is break it down, because I think it's too much to take on board. So I think it will be broken down into 5 sessions. And the first one will be a really, really basic introduction to basically say, you've got a higher, greater self, which is called your greater self. And then you've got this small ego or conditioned identity self, which I call small self. And you can choose to live from the orientation of either of them, and to talk about the difference between simply reacting and responding to events, both internal and external, and going beyond that and choosing to create something, and the power of choice and vision and choosing and taking inspired actions. So that's a very simple bare bones of it. And then I've actually got named up, I think it's called the bare bones. And then there'll be a second one where we go a bit deeper into what's holding you back, what sabotages you, what are the 12 key core beliefs that stop people that we've all got, and how do we overcome those, and how does greatness work and how does intuition work, and teaching you how to tap into intuition. And then the next one will be taking that even deeper into the Enneagram and understanding how to overcome those sabotage patterns, and then also really understanding about life orientation and creating from your soul self, from your greater self, intuitively. And I will give you techniques to create what I call fundamental choices, which are things like choosing to be free, choosing to be healthy, choosing to be true to yourself. There's 5 of them. They're called fundamental choices, and they're life orientations, and get you to work into that orientation and start to practice with the techniques of tuning into those and working with a structure to take you there, which we look at the visions and end results, what you want to create, where you are now, which is your current reality, and then how do you get from there to there, which is an inspired action that you take, which you get intuitively. And then once they've got that, we go into a thing called Gift of Life, which is a meditation that I've developed where you go into your own heart, take your key to your soul, and you go into a place called your gift of life, and you receive the gift of your true life. And then you gift it to others by creating it and bringing it into life, realizing it, actualizing it. And then there'll be an advanced one where we can start looking at maybe child inside work and other things that you can do to unhook traumatic patterns. That people have patterns where they create negative patterns all over and over and over in their lives. Sometimes with people it's relationships, sometimes it's with work or with money or with where they live, or they'll have a pattern that repeats, and it's about unhooking all of those. And for that you need to go a bit deeper into the psyche side, and for that I want people to know what they're doing, so that comes in on the mastery training.
We're going to have to almost leave it there, Bridget, because we're almost out of time. Just tell us, when is that likely to be available online?
I'm hoping to get it online by the end of the year.
Okay. So so people can find out more at your website?
Yes. If you're interested in the Bone Circle, please get hold of me. Go to my website, bridgetfinklaire.com. There is a page for the Bone Circle, and there's also a contact, which tells you a bit more, and there's a contact form at the back. If you fill that in and let me know you're interested in the Bone Circle, once it's up and running, I will send it to you. I originally thought I was going to do the whole thing online and have it accessible online, so that you go to a website, pay, and look at videos. But I think it needs to be done in person. So I probably will end up doing it as live Zoom sessions. But I want to restructure it. I need to restructure it, and that takes time. And
yeah,
with book launches and another book in the offing, because this is part of a trilogy, I kind of need a bit more time. But I want to do it because I've got a lot of people who've already trained with me who want to train again, because it's one of those things you can dive deeper every time you train. Yeah. So they're nagging me now, come on Bridget, when are you going to do the Bone Circle again? And I've got quite a waiting list of people who are going, come on. So I do need to get it done, and please do have a look. It will be coming soon.
Good.
It will be worth the wait.
Claire, thank you for adding your 10 best spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
Thank you, Sandie, for having me and allowing me to add the 10 books. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting about them this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bridget's book, Red Dress, is published by John Hunt Publishing. You can get it on Amazon and other online stores, as well as probably some bricks and mortar stores as well, bricks and mortar. And for more information about Bridget and her work and the Bone Circle, visit bridgetfinklaire.com. Thanks for joining us this week. You can see previous videos in this series on our YouTube channel, as well as on the video page at the No BS Spiritual Book Club, where you can also sign up for our newsletter and be the first to know who's coming next. That's it for this week. I hope you'll join me again at the same time next week for another episode of the No BS Spiritual Book Club's face-to-face with live streaming video series. Till then, it's goodbye from me.